Susan Sontag was one of the great public minds of the 20th century, and she knew it. The famed intellectual, writer, and activist, who died 10 years ago, is reborn in a new show at ArtsEmerson that uses her early journals as its base. It displays the Sontag brilliance that we knew and a frailty that we didn't. WGBH arts editor Jared Bowen joins me now with more on the show. Well, she could be pretty fearsome, so what kind of a frailty did this show?
This is a fascinating show. I find diaries interesting anyway, and so this goes back to her very early diaries from the time she was 15 years old, and it takes us through the time she was 30. From her actual writings, I went up to UCLA where she holds these materials, and so you see this young woman whose mind outpaces all of her peers, trying to reconcile her brilliance and her intelligence, not to mention her own sexual awakening, which in her case was often an attraction to women. But we see her frailty as a young woman in this show, and we have a clip here.
The ride to Sausalito is over the Golden Gate Bridge, and I looked down at the bay and felt warm and alive. I never fully comprehended that it was possible to live through your body.
So you're saying this is almost like you're seeing two people at the same time.
Well, this is what I really loved about this. It's very visual, as you just saw, with different video elements that sort of come at you. Her words come at you at some points. But there's also an older Sontag, played by the same actor, Mo Angelos, who looms over her younger self through the entirety of the program. And every once in a while, she offers commentary. And it's a reflection of what Sontag actually did, which was to go through her journals and make annotations later in life. And she was hard on herself.
Really?
But I talked to Mo Angelos, who plays on both Sontags, about going through her journals and realizing what kind of writer she was.
Her grasp of language was profound. Her mind, she talks about that, about herself, and she says, my librarian's mentality, or my cartographer's mind. And she had this mind that I think, I mean, I don't know because I'm not her, but from the traces that she's left us, she saw things as lists, and as maybe somehow physically she was able to hold them in her mind.
So obviously a very brilliant woman, which comes through on stage here.
All right, I want to bring someone into the discussion who actually knew Susan Sontag. Elsa Dorfman is herself a well-known artist and portrait photographer. Welcome. So you actually met Susan during the time when she would have been writing these journals.
I was 21 and she was 25 because she was 4 years older than I was. And she was the kind of person that you just knew she was in town, and she knew that she was there, and everybody gravitated to her. And in Paris at that time, there were cafes on every block, and what you did was you went from one cafe to another having a drink. There were no laptops or anything, so you had to schmooze, or you did schmooze, not have to. And so, did you hear Susan was back? I mean, that was what it was. Oh, Susan's in town.
What kind of anecdotal interactions did you have with her?
Well, we lived in the same hotel for a while because people were always switching hotels, and I just always knew her from the cafes. And
you thought she was, she was that smart?
Oh, she was. Her reputation preceded her. In the first place, she wrote the book that it was published under her husband's name, that he made his reputation on, about Freud, and she was just known as, you know, Susan wrote her husband's book, and didn't get any credit for it.
No one would have read it if she...
Maybe nobody would have read it back then. And she had a child. Her son was about 6 then, and she was always fighting with her husband about everybody. This was all like everybody knew this, fighting with her husband. And she had a fellowship to, I think it was Oxford, and she left her fellowship, which was, you know, an academic world, like, who can believe that? And she left and came to Paris. And she was so charismatic. I've only met a few people that were like her. So charismatic and so smart. And she knew, she could read books like this, and it was done.
Does she address her sexuality in these journals too? Because
well, that's a huge part of the show. I mean, she because you have to remember, and what's so significant about what Elsa's saying too is this is a young woman in the 1950s when this kind of thing wasn't done. Where you first of all to even get these opportunities, but then to leave them to pursue a woman that you're in love with. In her journals, she refers to her as H, and she's this mystery woman, mystery character who endures throughout time now. But that's what's so significant is to remember who this woman was. Not only was she so brilliant, but she was so strong and confident in this time.
And so charismatic and so beautiful.
Really?
Beautiful. Yeah, she was really, and it isn't like she didn't know she was beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, she came into
She carried it off.
She carried it off, yeah.
Sorry, I never met her.
So am I. Emily, I've got to tell you, I've become sort of obsessed by her.
Really? You go back and read everything, all things Sontag.
Exactly, through this show, because she's such a character, and she's so interesting, and her writing, of course, is just wonderfully expansive.
All right. Jerry Bowen, as always, thank you. And Elsa Dorfman, thank you for coming.